There comes a point where exhaustion stops looking like effort and starts feeling like distance from yourself. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix. The kind that comes from holding everything together in silence while watching others move forward with less weight, less discipline, less restraint. You did what you were supposed to do. You stayed consistent. You endured. You kept your composure when it would have been easier to break. And still, nothing seems to move. So you push harder. You tighten your grip. You chase outcomes as if force alone could bend reality in your favor. But somewhere along the way, something shifts, quietly. You begin to notice that the more you chase, the more distant everything becomes. And the moment you stop chasing is the moment everything starts coming to you. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not come from work. It comes from effort without direction, from trying to control what was never yours to control in the first place. You wake up, you move, you push through the day. You respond to messages, meet expectations, carry responsibilities. On the surface, everything looks stable, but underneath, something feels misaligned. Not broken, not chaotic, just quietly off. You notice it in the small moments. The pause after you check your phone and find nothing that moves your life forward. The silence after a long day where you realize you have been active but not effective. The subtle irritation when you see others progressing with less effort, less discipline, less restraint. You tell yourself to work harder. So you do. You add more hours. You increase your intensity. You tighten your grip on outcomes as if force will eventually bend things in your favor. You begin watching more closely, measuring more frequently, checking for signs that something is finally shifting. And yet the harder you push, the more distant it feels. Not dramatically, quietly, like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you close your fingers, the faster it slips through. This is the part most people never question. They assume the problem is effort, so they add more of it. They assume the problem is timing, so they rush. They assume the problem is luck, so they wait for it. But very few stop long enough to ask a more uncomfortable question. What if the problem is not that you are doing too little, but that you are holding on to the wrong things? Because there is a difference between discipline and desperation. Discipline is quiet. It is consistent. It focuses inward. It builds without needing immediate reward. Desperation is restless. It looks outward. It depends on response. It needs to see movement to justify effort. And the truth is, most people live in a constant state of quiet desperation without realizing it. They are not chasing because they are weak. They are chasing because they have been taught that progress requires constant pursuit of external results. But the Stoics saw this differently. They understood that power does not come from controlling outcomes. It comes from mastering the part of life that is actually yours. Your judgment, your actions, your response. Everything else moves on its own terms. This is where the shift begins, not in what you do, but in what you release. Think about how much of your attention is tied to things you cannot influence. Other people's opinions, their decisions, their timing, the way opportunities appear or disappear, the way life unfolds in ways you did not plan. You watch. You anticipate, you react, and without noticing, you give away your center. You start living in response instead of direction. A man who lives like this may look disciplined from the outside, but internally he is scattered, pulled in different directions by forces he does not control. This is why he feels tired. Not because he lacks strength, but because his strength is being applied in the wrong place. The Stoics would say that the moment you confuse what is yours with what is not, you lose your footing. And once you lose that, everything becomes unstable. You begin to depend on outcomes to feel secure. You begin to look for validation to confirm your direction. You begin to measure your worth through results that were never fully in your control to begin with. This is where frustration is born, not from failure, but from misplaced expectation. You expected the world to respond in a certain way. You expected effort to translate directly into reward. You expected clarity from things that are inherently uncertain. And when that doesn't happen, you interpret it as something personal, as if life is resisting you. But life is not resisting you. It is simply not operating according to your demands. And once you see that clearly, something begins to settle. You stop arguing with reality. You stop trying to force outcomes into existence. You stop measuring every moment as progress or failure. Instead, your attention returns to something far more stable: what you are doing right now, how you are doing it, and who you are becoming while you do it. This is where real control exists. Not in what happens, but in how you meet it. A man who understands this moves differently. He still works. He still builds. He still moves forward with intention. But there is no tension behind it. No constant checking. No silent bargaining with outcomes. No need to see immediate confirmation. He does what is required, and then he lets it stand. And because of that, his energy is no longer scattered. It is contained, directed, quiet. This is what makes him effective. Not intensity, but precision. Not force, but clarity. He is no longer reacting to every shift in his environment. He is anchored in something that does not move as easily. And from the outside, it may look like things are beginning to align for him. Opportunities appear. People respond differently. Doors open that once seemed closed. But this is not coincidence. It is the result of no longer chasing what was never his to control. When you stop reaching outward with desperation, you become easier to approach. When you stop needing validation, your presence becomes more stable. When you stop forcing outcomes, your actions become cleaner, more deliberate, more effective. And slowly, almost quietly, things begin to move. Not because you demanded it, but because you are no longer interfering with what would have come naturally. This is not something you can imitate. It is something you become. And it begins with a simple, uncomfortable realization. You've been holding on too tightly, not to your work, not to your discipline, but to the idea that you can control how everything unfolds. Once that grip loosens, everything else begins to shift. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but enough for you to notice. And once you notice it, you cannot go back to the old way of living, because now you understand where your power actually is, and more importantly, where it is not. This is where the path begins, not with more effort, but with less attachment. Once you begin to see where your energy has been misplaced, the next step is not to do more, but to separate more clearly. To draw a line that most people never draw, even after years of effort. A quiet division between what belongs to you and what never did. This sounds simple when spoken, but it is rarely practiced with precision. Because the mind does not naturally stay within its own territory. It reaches outward. It imagines, predicts, replays, negotiates with things that are not present and not controllable. And over time, this becomes a habit so subtle that you no longer recognize it as the source of your unrest. You think you are working towards something, but much of your effort is spent managing outcomes that have not yet happened. You think you are being responsible, but in reality, you are rehearsing uncertainty. You think you are preparing, but often you are just circling the same thoughts, trying to control what has already left your hands. The Stoics approached this differently, not with more thinking, but with sharper boundaries. They did not try to calm the mind by adding new beliefs. They trained it by removing confusion. They reduced life to a clear distinction. There are things that depend on you, and there are things that do not. And the moment you blur that line, you weaken yourself. Consider how easily that line disappears in daily life. You send a message and immediately begin to anticipate the reply. You complete a task and begin to measure how it will be received. You make a decision and start imagining every possible outcome as if thinking about it will somehow influence it. In each of these moments, your attention leaves your domain and attaches itself to something unstable. This is where tension begins, not in the action itself, but in what follows after, the unnecessary extension of your focus into territory that does not belong to you. And the more often you do this, the more your sense of control becomes tied to external movement. You begin to feel steady only when things respond the way you expect, and unsettled when they do not. This is not strength. It is dependence disguised as effort. A man who depends on outcomes will always feel uncertain because outcomes are never fully his. He can influence them, but he cannot guarantee them. And when his state of mind rises and falls with every response, every delay, every shift in circumstance, he loses the one thing that should remain constant, his center. The Stoic does not allow this to happen, not because he is indifferent, but because he is precise. He understands that his responsibility ends at action, not at reception, not at interpretation, not at outcome. He does what is required, and then he steps back internally, even while remaining engaged externally. This is a discipline most people never develop because it requires letting go of something they have been taught to value, the illusion that control extends beyond their own actions. It does not. You cannot control how someone sees you. You cannot control when an opportunity arrives. You cannot control how long something takes to develop. You cannot control whether your effort is immediately recognized. But you can control how you act in the absence of recognition. You can control how you respond to delay. You can control whether you remain steady when nothing seems to move. This is where your power actually is, not in changing the external, but in remaining unchanged by it. There is a quiet strength in this, a kind of stillness that does not come from passivity, but from clarity. You are no longer pulled by every possible outcome because you are no longer invested in controlling them. Your attention returns to something more stable, the quality of your actions, the consistency of your discipline, the direction of your character. And something subtle begins to happen when you live this way. Your mind becomes quieter, not because there are no uncertainties, but because you are no longer trying to solve them all at once. You deal with what is in front of you, you respond to what is real, and you leave the rest where it belongs, outside. This changes how you move through the day. You no longer check for confirmation after every action. You no longer feel the need to monitor every variable. You act, and then you continue, without interruption, without second-guessing every step. And this continuity gives you an advantage most people do not have. You conserve energy. While others are exhausting themselves thinking about outcomes, you are refining your process. While others are reacting to every shift, you are building something that does not depend on those shifts. Over time, this difference becomes visible. Not immediately, but inevitably, because the man who stays within his domain improves it. He sharpens his thinking, he strengthens his actions, he becomes more precise, more effective, more grounded. And the man who constantly reaches beyond his domain becomes scattered. He divides his attention, he weakens his focus. He becomes dependent on things that cannot be stabilized. The outcome of these two paths is not equal. One builds quietly, the other drains slowly. This is why the separation matters. Not as an idea, but as a practice repeated throughout the day. Each time your mind begins to drift outward, you bring it back. Each time you catch yourself trying to control what is not yours, you release it. Not with frustration, but with understanding. It was never yours to begin with. At first, this feels unnatural, because you are used to holding on, used to anticipating, used to extending yourself into every possible direction in an attempt to secure your position. But over time, something changes. You begin to trust your own actions more than external responses. You begin to measure your day by how well you showed up, not by what came back. You begin to feel stable, even when things are uncertain. And this stability is what most people are actually searching for, even if they do not realize it. They think they want results, but what they really want is the feeling of control that they believe results will bring. The Stoic understands that this feeling does not come from results. It comes from self-command, from knowing that regardless of what happens, you remain within your own authority. Your mind does not scatter. Your actions do not depend on approval. Your direction does not change based on temporary movement. This is the foundation, and without it, everything else becomes fragile. Once this is in place, something interesting begins to unfold. You stop chasing clarity from the outside, and for the first time, you begin to see clearly from within. When your attention returns to what is yours, something else becomes visible, not immediately but gradually. You begin to notice how much of your previous effort was not directed toward building, but toward waiting. Waiting for a response, waiting for recognition, waiting for something outside of you to confirm that you are on the right path. And this is where chasing truly reveals itself. It is not just movement, it is dependence on movement. A man who is chasing is not simply working hard. He's watching constantly, measuring constantly, interpreting every small signal as progress or failure. He's not grounded in his actions, but in what follows after them. This creates a quiet instability, because what follows is never fully predictable. So he begins to adjust himself based on outcomes. He becomes reactive without realizing it. If something works, he leans into it with urgency. If something fails, he pulls back with doubt. His direction is no longer guided by reason, but by reaction, and over time this erodes something deeper, his self-respect. Not in an obvious way, but in small compromises. He starts making decisions, not because they are right, but because they might produce a desired result. He begins to shape his behavior around external approval. He becomes careful in the wrong way, not disciplined, but cautious of losing something he has not even secured. This is the cost of chasing. You begin to trade clarity for outcome. You start asking different questions. Not what is right, but what will work. Not what is true, but what will be accepted. Not what builds strength, but what brings reward. And in doing so, you move further away from the one thing that makes you effective: your alignment with your own principles. The Stoics did not measure life this way. They did not evaluate actions based on immediate results. They evaluated them based on whether those actions were within their control and whether they were done with discipline, reason, and integrity, because they understood something most people overlook. Outcomes are delayed. Character is immediate. You can act with clarity right now. You can respond with discipline right now. You can maintain your standard right now. But you cannot force a result right now. And when you forget this, you begin to rush. You try to accelerate what cannot be rushed. You look for shortcuts. You try to manipulate timing. But timing is not yours. And the more you try to take control of it, the more frustrated you become. This is why chasing weakens your position. Not because effort is wrong, but because misplaced effort creates tension, and tension clouds judgment. You begin to act from urgency instead of clarity. You send the second message too soon. You follow up before giving things space. You adjust your approach, not because it is better, but because you are uncomfortable with stillness, and that discomfort reveals something important. You do not trust the process of your own actions. You trust only visible movement. But visible movement is not always a sign of progress. Sometimes it is just noise. A man who understands this becomes slower in a specific way. Not lazy, not passive, but deliberate. He does not rush to close every gap. He allows space where space is required. He understands that not every silence needs to be filled. This changes how others perceive him, because most people are used to urgency. They are used to people who chase, who reach, who try to secure attention or validation through constant movement. So when they encounter someone who is steady, who acts and then does not immediately react, it stands out. Not loudly, but clearly. There is no grasping in his behavior, no subtle attempt to pull things toward him. He moves forward, but he does not lean, and this creates a different kind of presence. One that does not ask, but attracts. Not because he's trying to attract, but because he's no longer pushing things away through tension. This is something most people misunderstand. They believe attraction comes from doing more, saying more, positioning more. But often it comes from removing what should not be there. The excess urgency, the need for response, the subtle pressure that others can feel, even if it is never spoken. When that is gone, your actions become cleaner, and clean actions are easier to respond to. A simple example reveals this. Two men do the same work. One completes it and immediately looks for feedback watches, for response checks, for recognition. The other completes it and moves on to the next task, without hesitation, without waiting. The first is dependent. The second is stable. Over time, the second man becomes more reliable, not because he is more talented, but because he is consistent regardless of outcome. And consistency builds something that chasing cannot. Trust, not just from others, but within himself. He knows that his actions are not tied to reaction. He knows that his direction is not dependent on immediate confirmation. This gives him an advantage that is difficult to replicate. He does not lose momentum when nothing happens. He continues. And that continuation is what most people lack, because most people stop not physically but mentally when results are not visible. Their energy drops, their focus weakens, their discipline becomes conditional. They do not realize that the moment they start measuring too closely, they interrupt their own progress. They step out of action and into evaluation too soon. The Stoic avoids this. He understands that evaluation has its place, but not after every step. He builds first. He observes later, and even then he observes without attachment. This is where the real shift occurs. You stop asking if things are working. You start asking if you are working correctly. You stop looking for signs. You start reinforcing standards. And slowly, your attention detaches from the need to see results immediately. You begin to trust something deeper, not in a vague sense, but in a grounded, practical way. You trust that if your actions are consistent, disciplined, and aligned with reason, then results will follow in their own time. Not because you demand it, but because that is the nature of things that are built properly. This removes a great deal of pressure. You are no longer responsible for everything, only for your part. And that is enough, more than enough, because most people never fully take responsibility for even that. They divide themselves between action and expectation. You do not. You act fully, and then you release fully. This is what separates effort from chasing, and once you understand this distinction, you begin to see your past differently. You realize that much of your exhaustion did not come from the work itself. It came from holding on to what was never yours to carry. And once you set that down, something opens. Not externally at first, internally. A space where your actions can finally stand on their own. And from that space, everything begins to move with less resistance. Once you stop exhausting yourself trying to control outcomes, a different kind of challenge appears. Not external, but internal, because now, instead of chasing results, you are forced to face resistance directly, and resistance, when no longer misunderstood, becomes something else entirely. Most people see obstacles as interruptions, as signs that something is wrong, that progress has been blocked, that the path they chose is somehow invalid. So when they encounter difficulty, they hesitate, they question, they pull back. Not because they lack ability, but because they misread the situation. They assume that if something were meant to work, it would move smoothly, that if they were on the right path, there would be less friction, fewer setbacks, fewer delays. But this assumption is where many lose direction, because difficulty is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that something is being tested, refined, strengthened. The Stoics understood this with a clarity that most people still avoid. They did not see obstacles as separate from the path. They saw them as the path itself. What stands in the way becomes the way. Not as a phrase to repeat, but as a principle to live by. When something blocks your movement, it is not removing your progress. It is shaping it. It is forcing you to adapt, to think differently, to build a level of strength that would not exist without that resistance. A man who never encounters difficulty never develops precision. He moves forward, but without depth, without resilience, without the ability to withstand pressure when it inevitably arrives. So when pressure comes, he breaks. Not because he is weak, but because he was never trained. This is why setbacks are necessary, not as punishment, but as preparation. Think about the moments that have shaped you the most. They were not the times when everything moved easily. They were the times when something went wrong, when plans failed, when something you relied on disappeared without warning. At the time, those moments felt like disruption, but looking back, they forced you to adjust in ways you would not have chosen voluntarily. They made you sharper, more aware, less dependent. They removed illusions, and that is their true function. Obstacles remove illusions. They expose where your expectations were unrealistic. They reveal where your discipline was incomplete. They show you where you were relying on something that could not hold. And once that is exposed, you have a choice. You can resist it, complain about it, interpret it as something unfair. Or you can use it. A man who uses obstacles does not ask why this is happening to him. He asks what this requires from him. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because now, instead of being passive in the face of difficulty, he becomes active within it. He looks for what can be improved, what can be strengthened, what can be removed. He does not waste time arguing with reality. He studies it, and this makes him dangerous in a quiet way. Because while others are distracted by frustration, he is adapting. While others are waiting for things to become easier, he is becoming more capable. This is how real progress is built. Not through ideal conditions, but through imperfect ones handled correctly. Consider how most people react when something fails. They take it personally. They attach their identity to the outcome. If it does not work, they interpret it as a reflection of their ability, and this creates hesitation. The next time they act, they carry doubt. They become cautious in a way that limits their effectiveness. They try to avoid failure instead of learning from it. This slows them down, not physically but mentally, and once the mind slows with doubt, the body follows. The Stoic avoids this trap, not by ignoring failure, but by redefining it. Failure is not an endpoint. It is information. It shows you where something did not hold, where something needs adjustment, where your understanding was incomplete, nothing more. When you remove the emotional weight from it, you can see it clearly, and when you see it clearly, you can correct it. This is why the man who learns from obstacles progresses faster than the man who avoids them, because he is constantly refining his approach. He does not need perfect conditions to move forward. He builds within whatever conditions are present. And, over time, this creates a level of adaptability that most people never reach. He becomes difficult to stop, not because nothing goes wrong, but because nothing going wrong can stop him. There is a difference. One depends on circumstances, the other depends on response. And response is always within your control. This is where the earlier separation becomes essential. If you are still attached to outcomes, obstacles will frustrate you. They will feel like delays, like resistance, like something to push against. But if your focus remains on your actions, obstacles become part of your work. They are no longer interruptions. They are extensions. You do not stop when they appear. You adjust. And that adjustment is where growth happens. This is not comfortable, but comfort is not the goal. Clarity is. A clear mind does not expect ease. It expects reality. And reality includes difficulty. Once you accept this fully without resistance, something shifts again. You stop being surprised by setbacks. You stop being thrown off by delays. You stop interpreting every challenge as a sign to reconsider your direction. Instead, you remain steady. You continue, not blindly, but with awareness. You observe what is happening, you adapt your approach, and you move forward without losing your center. This steadiness is what most people lack. Not because they are incapable, but because they are constantly reacting. They allow external conditions to dictate their internal state. So when things go well, they feel confident. When things go wrong, they feel uncertain. Their stability depends on something that is always changing. The Stoic removes this dependency. He builds a foundation that does not move with circumstances, and from that foundation he can handle whatever comes, without urgency, without panic, without losing direction. This is where obstacles begin to lose their weight. Not because they disappear, but because they no longer disrupt you. They become part of the process. And once you see them this way, you stop fearing them. You stop avoiding them. You stop trying to move around them. You move through them. And in doing so, you become something different, more precise, more resilient, more grounded in what actually matters. Not what happens, but how you respond. This is where strength is built. Not in the absence of difficulty, but in the correct handling of it. And once this becomes your default, something important happens. You no longer need things to go your way, because you have learned how to move forward regardless. And that is a level of freedom most people never reach, because they are still waiting for the path to become easier, while you have already become stronger. After you stop resisting obstacles, another layer reveals itself, one that is less visible, but far more influential. It is not the difficulty itself that unsettles you, but the fear of what that difficulty might lead to. Not what is happening, but what could happen. This is where most tension is born, not in reality, but in anticipation. You imagine loss before it arrives. You project failure before it occurs. You build entire scenarios in your mind, not from evidence, but from possibility. And once those scenarios take hold, they begin to influence how you act in the present. You become cautious in the wrong way. You hold back when you should move forward. You cling when you should release. You try to protect what has not even been taken. And in doing so, you weaken your position, because fear of loss creates attachment, and attachment creates instability. The Stoics understood this clearly, which is why they practiced something most people avoid entirely. They did not wait for loss to teach them. They prepared for it in advance, not with anxiety but with reason. They would take time to imagine what they feared: losing their position, losing their reputation, losing relationships, losing comfort. Not to dwell in it, but to examine it, to ask a simple question. If this were to happen, would I still be able to stand? And more often than not, the answer was yes. Not easily, not without difficulty, but yes. And that realization changes something fundamental. Because once you see that, you can endure what you fear. The fear itself loses its weight. It no longer controls your decisions. You no longer act from a place of protection. You act from clarity. Most people never reach this point because they avoid the thought entirely. They distract themselves from it. They hope that by not thinking about loss, they can avoid it. But avoidance does not remove fear. It strengthens it. What you refuse to face grows in the background. It influences your behavior without your awareness. It makes you hold on tighter. It makes you hesitate. It makes you dependent on things remaining stable. But stability is never guaranteed. Everything changes. And once you accept this without resistance, you begin to operate differently. You stop trying to secure everything. You stop building your sense of control around things that can disappear. Instead, you build something that does not depend on permanence. Your ability to endure, your ability to adapt, your ability to remain steady even when something important is removed. This is where real confidence is built. Not in having everything, but in knowing you can continue without it. There is a difference between a man who feels secure because nothing has been taken from him, and a man who feels secure because he knows he can rebuild. The first is fragile, the second is stable, and stability is what allows you to move without fear. When you're no longer afraid of losing something, you stop clinging to it. When you stop clinging, your actions become cleaner. You are no longer negotiating from a place of need. You are no longer adjusting yourself to prevent a possible loss. You are simply acting as you should. This is where detachment becomes strength, not coldness, not indifference, but the absence of fear-driven attachment. You still care. You still invest. You still build, but you do not depend. And that difference is visible. It changes how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you respond. People can sense when someone is holding on too tightly. They can sense when someone is afraid of losing something. Even if it is never spoken, it appears in behavior, in hesitation, in over-explaining, in the need to secure outcomes too quickly. And this often pushes things away. Not because you lack value, but because your actions are influenced by fear rather than clarity. When that fear is removed, everything becomes simpler. You no longer try to force timing. You no longer rush to secure what has not yet formed. You allow things to develop at their natural pace. And this patience creates space. Space for things to come to you without pressure. Space for decisions to be made without urgency. Space for your actions to remain consistent regardless of what is happening externally. This is what most people misunderstand. They believe that to get what they want, they must hold on tighter. But often it is the opposite. Holding on too tightly distorts your behavior. It makes you act from scarcity. And scarcity repels. Not in an abstract sense, but in a practical one. It makes you less clear, less stable, less precise. And people respond to that. Opportunities respond to that. When you remove that tension, your presence changes. You become easier to work with, easier to trust, easier to engage. Not because you are trying to attract anything, but because you are no longer pushing things away through fear. This is the paradox. When you are no longer afraid of losing something, you become more capable of keeping it. Not because you control it, but because you no longer interfere with it. You allow it to exist without pressure, and that is what gives it room to grow. A simple example shows this clearly. A man who fears losing a relationship becomes controlling. He seeks reassurance. He watches for signs of change. He tries to secure certainty in something that cannot be fully controlled. And in doing so, he creates tension. The relationship becomes strained, not because it was unstable to begin with, but because his fear introduced instability. Another man who understands that loss is always possible does not cling. He invests, but he does not depend. He shows up, but he does not control. And because of that, the relationship remains open. There is no pressure. And in that absence of pressure, it can develop naturally. This principle applies to everything: work, opportunities, respect. When you stop acting from fear of loss, your actions align with reason again. You do what is right, not what feels safe. You move forward not because you are certain of the outcome, but because you are certain of your direction. And this certainty is enough, more than enough, because outcomes are never guaranteed, but direction can be. And when your direction is clear, you no longer need constant reassurance. You continue, even when nothing seems to change, even when results are not visible, even when uncertainty remains. Because you are no longer trying to eliminate uncertainty. You are learning to operate within it. This is what frees you, not the removal of risk, but the ability to function without being controlled by it. And once you reach this point, something else becomes possible. You can finally be present. Not partially, not conditionally, but fully, because your mind is no longer occupied by what might be lost. It is grounded in what is here, and from that place your actions become sharper, your thinking becomes clearer, your movement becomes more direct. This is where the next shift begins. Not in how you act, but in where your attention rests. And that changes everything that follows. Once fear begins to loosen its grip, your attention naturally starts to settle. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough for you to notice something that was always there and constantly overlooked. The only moment you can actually act within is the one directly in front of you. This sounds obvious when spoken, but it is rarely lived with precision, because the mind does not stay in the present by default. It drifts. It returns to what has already happened, replaying it with different conclusions, as if revisiting it could change anything. Or it moves forward into what has not happened yet, constructing outcomes, preparing for conversations, anticipating reactions that may never come. And in both directions, it leaves the only place where your actions have any effect. The present is where your control exists, but it is also where most people spend the least amount of time. You may be physically present, but mentally you are somewhere else. Reviewing a mistake from yesterday, preparing for a problem that might happen next week, trying to resolve something that is not yet real. This creates a constant sense of pressure. Not because anything is wrong in the moment, but because your mind is occupied with things that are not here. You carry the weight of multiple timelines at once. The past which cannot be changed, the future which cannot be controlled, and the present which becomes neglected. This is why you feel scattered, not because life is too complex, but because your attention is divided. The Stoics approached this differently. They did not try to eliminate thought. They trained it to return. Again and again, they brought their focus back to what was in front of them, not as a technique, but as a discipline. because they understood that clarity does not come from thinking more, it comes from thinking correctly. And correct thinking begins with recognizing what is real, right now, not what might happen, not what should have happened, or what is. A man who can remain here, even when his mind tries to pull him away, gains a kind of advantage that is difficult to describe but easy to observe. He does not rush. He does not overreact. He does not lose direction because of imagined scenarios. He deals with what is in front of him fully without distraction. And because of that, his actions become more precise. He listens more carefully. He responds more accurately. He avoids mistakes that come from assumption rather than observation. This is the power of presence, not as a concept, but as a way of operating. Most people think they need to plan more, analyze more, anticipate more. But often what they need is to return, to stop projecting themselves into situations that are not yet real, and to fully engage with the one that is. Because this is where your influence exists. Right now, not later, not before, right here. Think about how much energy is lost to anticipation. You imagine a conversation before it happens. You rehearse what you will say. You prepare responses to things that may never be spoken. And when the moment arrives, it rarely unfolds the way you expected. So all that preparation becomes irrelevant. Worse than that, it makes you rigid. You are no longer responding to what is actually happening. You are trying to fit the moment into what you imagined. This creates friction. You miss details, you misread tone, you react to your own expectations instead of reality. And this is how mistakes happen, not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of presence. The Stoic avoids this by simplifying his approach. He does not try to control every possible outcome. He focuses on the current action, what needs to be done, what can be done well, and then he does it. Fully, without distraction, without dividing his attention between what is happening and what might happen next. This does not mean he ignores the future. It means he does not live in it. He prepares when preparation is required. He plans when planning is useful. But once the moment arrives, he is there, completely. And this completeness gives him an edge, because most people are only partially present. They are thinking about what comes next. They are still processing what came before. They are not fully engaged with what is in front of them, so their actions are diluted, their attention is weakened, their performance becomes inconsistent. The man who is present does not have this problem. His focus is undivided, and undivided focus produces better results. Not immediately, not always visibly, but consistently. This is what most people overlook. They chase outcomes while neglecting the quality of their attention. But attention is what shapes action, and action is what produces results. So if your attention is scattered, your results will reflect that. If your attention is steady, your results will follow. Not because you forced them, but because your process improved. This is where the shift becomes clear. You stop asking when things will happen. You start asking how well you are handling what is happening now. You stop measuring progress by external movement. You start measuring it by internal clarity. And this changes your experience of time. You are no longer waiting for something to arrive. You are engaged in what is already here. This removes a great deal of tension, because waiting creates pressure. You feel like something is missing, like something needs to happen for things to begin. But when you are fully present, nothing is missing. You are already in motion, already building, already progressing, even if nothing has visibly changed. This is difficult at first, because you are used to linking progress with visible results. But over time, you begin to trust the process itself, not in an abstract way, but in a practical one. You see that when you focus on the current action, you improve it. When you improve it, your results improve, not instantly but inevitably, and this inevitability replaces urgency. You no longer feel the need to rush. You understand that what you are building takes time, and that time cannot be compressed through pressure. It can only be used properly. This is where patience becomes natural. Not forced, not practiced as an idea, but experienced as a consequence of clarity. You are no longer trying to accelerate something that cannot be rushed. You are working within the pace that things require, and because of that, your actions remain steady, not interrupted by frustration, not weakened by doubt, just consistent. And consistency is what most people fail to maintain. Not because they lack discipline, but because they lose focus. They drift into the future. They return to the past. They leave the present. And once they leave, their actions weaken. You do not. You return again and again to what is in front of you, to what can be done now, to what is within your control. And from that place, everything becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. And clarity is what allows you to continue without resistance, even when nothing seems to change, even when results are delayed, even when uncertainty remains, because you are no longer living in what is not real. You are grounded in what is, and that is enough to move forward, without distraction, without tension, without the need to chase anything at all. As your attention stabilizes in the present, another pattern begins to surface, one that has been shaping your decisions for years without being questioned. The quiet habit of always wanting more, not in a disciplined way, but in a restless way that never settles. You begin to notice it in small forms: the inability to feel satisfied even after progress is made, the immediate shift from one goal to the next without pause, the constant sense that something is missing even when nothing is wrong. This is not ambition, it is dissatisfaction. And dissatisfaction, when left unchecked, becomes a kind of background noise that distorts everything you experience. You stop seeing what is in front of you clearly because your mind is already reaching for what is not there. You complete something, but instead of recognizing it, you move past it too quickly. You gain something, but instead of using it well, you compare it to what you do not yet have. And this creates a strange imbalance. You are always moving forward, but you never feel grounded. You are always building, but you never feel stable, because your sense of progress is tied to what is missing, not to what is present. The Stoics addressed this directly, not by rejecting desire entirely, but by refining it. They understood that desire, when unexamined, leads to dependence. It makes you rely on external things to complete your sense of self. It places your stability in something that is always changing. And once your stability depends on something outside of you, it becomes fragile. You begin to need more in order to feel the same. More recognition, more results, more confirmation. And because of that, you lose your ability to stand still. You cannot remain where you are without feeling incomplete. This is where chasing returns, even after you have begun to let it go. Not through action, but through thought. You are no longer chasing outcomes physically, but you are still chasing them mentally. You are still measuring your position based on what you do not yet have, and this keeps you unsettled. The Stoic resolves this by shifting attention, not away from progress, but away from lack. He trains himself to see clearly what is already in his possession, not as a way to feel comfortable, but as a way to remain grounded. Because when you recognize what is already present, your mind stabilizes. You stop reaching constantly. You stop evaluating your position through absence. You begin to operate from sufficiency. This does not mean you stop improving. It means you improve from a place of stability, not from a place of deficiency. There is a difference. A man who builds from deficiency is always trying to fill a gap. A man who builds from sufficiency is refining what already exists. The first is driven by lack. The second is guided by clarity, and clarity produces better results. Not because it is more intense, but because it is more precise. When you're not distracted by what you do not have, you can use what you do have more effectively. Your time becomes more valuable. Your focus becomes sharper. Your actions become more deliberate, and this increases your effectiveness without increasing your effort. This is something most people never experience, because they are constantly shifting their attention outward. They are always aware of what others have, what they are missing, what they need to reach next. And this comparison creates a subtle pressure. It makes them feel behind even when they are moving forward. It makes them rush even when there is no need. And that rushing leads to mistakes. It weakens their decision-making. It reduces their ability to stay consistent, because they are not building based on their own direction. They are reacting to external movement. The Stoic removes this, not by isolating himself, but by controlling his perception. He sees others, but he does not measure himself through them. He recognizes what he has, and he uses it, fully, without distraction. This creates a different kind of presence, one that is not restless, one that does not constantly seek, one that remains steady even as it moves forward. And this steadiness changes how you experience progress. You no longer feel the need to accelerate everything. You no longer feel like you are falling behind. You move at the pace required, not at the pace imposed by comparison. And this pace is sustainable. It allows you to continue without burning out. It allows you to maintain your discipline without constant pressure. It allows you to improve without losing your center. This is where real momentum is built. Not through intensity, but through consistency. And consistency depends on stability. A man who is constantly dissatisfied cannot remain consistent, because his motivation is tied to achieving something that is not yet present. Once that motivation weakens, so does his effort. But a man who is grounded in what he already has does not rely on that kind of motivation. He relies on discipline, and discipline doesn't require excitement. It requires clarity. It requires a clear understanding of what needs to be done and the willingness to do it, regardless of how he feels. This is what makes his progress reliable, not dramatic, but steady, not fast, but continuous. And over time, this continuity produces results that appear sudden to others. But to him, they are the natural outcome of consistent action. This is another shift that changes how you see your path. You stop looking for immediate breakthroughs. You start recognizing gradual improvement. You stop expecting sudden change. You start building sustained growth. And this removes a great deal of frustration. Because frustration often comes from expecting too much too quickly, from wanting results that are not aligned with the time required to produce them. When you let go of that expectation, you become more patient. Not passive, but patient. You continue working, but without the constant pressure of needing to see results immediately. And this allows you to maintain your standard, without interruption, without doubt, without the need to constantly adjust your direction based on external movement. This is where satisfaction becomes possible, not as a final state, but as a condition you can maintain while you continue to improve. You are no longer waiting to feel complete. You are operating from completeness. And from that place, everything becomes more effective, because your actions are no longer distorted by lack. They are guided by clarity. And clarity is what allows you to move forward without losing your center. Even as you continue to build, even as you continue to grow, even as you continue to move towards something greater, you remain grounded in what is already here. And that changes everything that follows. Once you stop chasing what is missing and begin to stand firmly in what is already yours, another tension comes into view, one that is quieter, but just as limiting. It is the resistance to reality itself. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. A subtle refusal to accept things as they are. You see it in the way you think about your circumstances. You tell yourself, this should not be happening, this should be different, this is not where I should be right now. And while those thoughts may seem reasonable, they create friction, because reality does not adjust itself to your preferences. It remains what it is, and every moment you spend arguing with it is a moment you lose the ability to work within it. Most people do not realize how much energy is wasted in this quiet resistance. They believe they are trying to improve their situation, but in truth, they are still denying it. They are holding two positions at once. One part of them sees what is real, while another part insists that it should not be this way. This division weakens them. It splits their focus. It delays action. It creates frustration without producing change. The Stoics resolved this with a discipline that most people misunderstand. They accepted reality fully without distortion, without complaint, without hesitation. But acceptance as they practiced it was not surrender. It was clarity. To accept something is to see it as it is without adding judgment to it, without labeling it as unfair or undeserved, without creating a narrative around it that only serves to increase your resistance. It is simply to acknowledge what is present, nothing more. And from that acknowledgement, something becomes possible. You can act, because action requires clarity. If you are still resisting reality, you are not fully seeing it. And if you are not fully seeing it, your actions will be misaligned. You will act based on what you wish were true, not on what actually is. And that leads to mistakes. It leads to decisions that do not hold, to strategies that collapse under pressure, to efforts that feel strong at first, but fail because they were built on a distorted understanding. This is why acceptance is not passive. It is the beginning of effective action. A man who accepts his position clearly does not waste time complaining about it. He does not dwell on how things should have been. He does not compare his situation to others in a way that weakens his resolve. He looks at what is in front of him and asks a different question. What can be done from here? Not from an ideal position, not from a future state, from here. This shift is critical, because most people delay action while waiting for better conditions. They believe they need more clarity, more stability, more certainty before they can move forward. But those conditions rarely arrive on their own. They are built through action, and action begins from where you are, not from where you wish to be. This is where many remain stuck. They reject their current situation, but they do not change it. They stay in a state of resistance, believing that dissatisfaction alone will create movement. But dissatisfaction without action changes nothing, and action without acceptance is misdirected. The Stoic avoids both. He accepts fully, and then he acts without delay, without hesitation, without emotional resistance. This creates a kind of efficiency that is difficult to replicate, because there is no wasted motion, no time spent arguing with reality, no energy lost in wishing things were different. All attention is directed toward what can actually be influenced. And this produces results, not instantly, not dramatically, but consistently. A simple example makes this clear. A man loses his position. His first reaction is resistance. He tells himself this should not have happened. He feels wronged. He spends days or weeks replaying the event, analyzing what could have been done differently, questioning the fairness of it. During that time, nothing changes. His situation remains the same, but his ability to act is reduced. Another man faces the same situation. He recognizes what has happened without adding unnecessary judgment. He sees it clearly. This is where I am. And from that point, he begins to move. He assesses what is available. He adjusts his approach. He takes action based on reality, not based on expectation. And because of that, he recovers faster. Not because he is more fortunate, but because he is more aligned. This alignment is what most people lack. They are either resisting reality or surrendering to it. The Stoic does neither. He accepts, and then he builds. This is where strength becomes visible, not in avoiding difficulty, but in handling it correctly. Not in wishing for better conditions, but in creating them from what exists. And this requires discipline, not the kind that pushes harder, but the kind that remains steady. That does not react emotionally to every change. That does not lose direction when things do not go as planned. That continues with clarity, with precision, with control over what is actually controllable. This is where your position begins to change. Not because reality becomes easier, but because you become more effective within it. You stop wasting time. You stop dividing your attention. You stop weakening your own actions through resistance. And once that is removed, your efforts become more focused, more direct, more aligned with what is actually possible. This is where progress accelerates. Not through force, but through efficiency. Because when every action is aligned with reality, nothing is wasted. Every step builds on the last. Every adjustment improves your position. Every decision becomes more precise, and over time, this precision compounds. It creates momentum, not the kind that feels intense, but the kind that is stable, that continues even when nothing seems to change, that builds even when results are not visible. This is the difference between someone who is chasing and someone who is building. The one who chases is always reacting. The one who builds is always aligned. And alignment is what allows you to move forward without resistance. Even in difficult conditions, even when progress is slow, even when outcomes are uncertain, because you are no longer waiting for reality to match your expectations. You are working with it as it is, and that is what makes you effective. That is what allows you to move without hesitation. That is what removes the need to chase anything at all, because now you are not trying to force your way forward. You are moving in the direction that reality allows. And that direction, when followed consistently, always leads somewhere. Not always where you expected, but always where you can continue building. And that is enough, more than enough. Because once you can build from where you are no longer limited by where you started. When you stop resisting reality and begin to act from where you truly stand, something deeper begins to take shape. Not in your circumstances at first, but in your internal structure. The way you experience events starts to change, not because the world becomes more stable, but because you no longer depend on it to feel stable. This is where most people encounter a different kind of discomfort. They have learned to separate what is in their control. They have learned to face obstacles without retreat. They have learned to accept reality without resistance, but they are still affected by outcomes in a way they cannot fully explain. A delayed response unsettles them. A failed attempt lowers their confidence. A lack of recognition makes them question their direction. Even when they understand these things are outside their control, their internal state still shifts with them. This is where emotional dependence remains. Not obvious, not loud, but persistent. It appears in the way your mood follows external movement, in the way your sense of progress depends on visible results, in the way your confidence rises when things go well and drops when they do not. This is the final attachment, not to outcomes themselves, but to how those outcomes make you feel. And as long as your internal state is tied to external conditions, you will never be stable, because external conditions are never stable. They shift constantly. And if your peace depends on them, your peace will shift with them. The Stoics understood this as a central problem, not something secondary. They saw that mastering action was not enough. You had to master your response to the result of that action. Otherwise, you remain vulnerable. You remain exposed to every change, every delay, every unexpected turn. A man who is emotionally dependent may appear disciplined. He may work hard, stay consistent, and follow a clear direction. But internally, he is still reacting. He still needs things to go his way, and that need shapes his behavior. It makes him hesitate when outcomes are uncertain. It makes him overcommit when results are positive. It makes him unstable in ways that are not always visible, but always present. This is why emotional self-sufficiency is essential, not as an idea, but as a practice. It means your internal state does not rely on what happens outside of you. It means you remain steady regardless of outcome. Not indifferent, not detached in a cold sense, but grounded. You care about your work, but you are not controlled by the result. You invest in your actions, but you do not depend on what comes back. This creates a different kind of presence, one that is difficult to disturb. Because there is nothing external that can fully destabilize it. If something works, you continue. If something fails, you adjust. But in both cases, you remain the same internally. This consistency is what most people lack. They are consistent in effort, but not in state. They can show up physically, but their internal condition changes constantly, and this affects everything. Their decisions become less reliable, their focus becomes inconsistent, their discipline weakens under pressure, because they are still reacting. The Stoic removes this reaction, not by suppressing emotion, but by understanding it. He recognizes that his feelings are not commands, they are signals, and signals can be observed without being followed. This creates space between what happens and how you respond, and in that space, you regain control. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause, you assess, you choose, and that choice is what defines your stability. A simple example reveals this clearly. A man sends an important proposal. He waits for a response. Hours pass, then days. Nothing comes back. Most people begin to shift internally at this point. They start questioning their work. They imagine rejection. They replay what they could have done differently. Their confidence drops, not because anything has happened, but because nothing has happened. They are reacting to absence. The Stoic sees this differently. He recognizes that the response is not in his control. His responsibility ended when he completed the work. So he does not attach his state to the outcome. He continues. He moves to the next task. He maintains his standard. And because of that, his momentum remains intact. He does not lose time. He does not lose focus. He does not lose his center. This is the advantage of emotional self-sufficiency. You are not interrupted by uncertainty. You are not slowed by delay. You are not weakened by outcomes that do not align with your expectations. You remain consistent, and consistency over time creates results that appear effortless. But they are not effortless. They are the result of not being disrupted. This is what most people fail to understand. They believe success comes from doing more, but often it comes from not losing what you have already built. Your focus, your discipline, your clarity, and these are lost when you allow your internal state to be shaped by external movement. When you remove that dependency, everything stabilizes. Your actions become more reliable, your thinking becomes clearer, your presence becomes stronger. Not because you are trying to appear strong, but because you're no longer unstable. This is what people respond to, not effort alone, but steadiness, not intensity, but consistency, not reaction, but control. A man who remains the same regardless of outcome becomes predictable in the best way. Others know how he will act. They trust his response. They rely on his consistency. And this trust opens doors that effort alone cannot. Because people do not move toward instability. They move toward what is steady, what is reliable, what does not shift under pressure. This is what makes you effective, not just in your actions, but in your presence. You are no longer trying to secure outcomes. You are creating conditions where outcomes can develop naturally. And this happens when your internal state is no longer dependent. When you no longer need things to go your way in order to remain steady. When you can act without attachment, respond without reaction, continue without hesitation. This is where the shift becomes complete. You are no longer chasing, not externally, not internally. You are simply moving, and in that movement, everything begins to align. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped interfering with it. Once your internal state no longer depends on outcomes, your relationship with action itself begins to change. You are no longer working to get something. You are working because it is the correct thing to do. This is a subtle shift, but it alters everything that follows. Most people approach their actions as transactions. They invest effort with the expectation of return. They do the work, but behind it, there is always a quiet calculation. If I do this, I should get that. If I show up consistently, results should follow in a predictable way. If I maintain discipline, recognition should come. And when that exchange does not occur as expected, frustration appears. Not because the work was wrong, but because the expectation was misplaced. This is where resentment begins. You start to feel like your effort is not being acknowledged, like your discipline is not producing what it should, like something is being withheld from you. And this feeling, even when unspoken, begins to shape your behavior. You become less consistent. You question whether it is worth continuing. You begin to hold back, not fully committing unless you see signs that it will pay off. This is the danger of treating action as a transaction. Because once your effort depends on return, your discipline becomes conditional. And conditional discipline is unstable. It fluctuates based on results. It weakens under delay. It collapses under uncertainty. The Stoics rejected this approach entirely. They did not act in order to receive. They acted because it aligned with who they chose to be. Their focus was not on what their actions would bring them, but on whether those actions were correct in themselves. Were they acting with reason, with discipline, with integrity? If the answer was yes, then the action was complete. Nothing else was required. This removes a great deal of pressure. You are no longer performing for an outcome. You are not trying to secure a result through effort. You are simply doing what is required at the highest level you are capable of and allowing that to stand on its own. This changes how you experience your work. You are no longer waiting for validation. You're not checking constantly to see if something has come back. You're not measuring your effort against immediate results. You're focused entirely on the quality of what you're doing. And this focus improves your output, Not because you are trying harder, but because you are less distracted. Your attention is no longer divided between action and expectation. It is fully within the action itself. This produces a level of precision that most people never reach, because they are always partially focused on what comes next. You are not. You are here, fully engaged, fully present. And this is what allows your work to improve consistently, without interruption, without hesitation, without the need for constant reinforcement. A man who operates this way becomes reliable in a deeper sense, not just in showing up, but in how he shows up. He does not need external pressure to maintain his standard. He does not need immediate reward to stay consistent. He does not need recognition to continue. He acts because it is part of his structure, because it is who he has chosen to become. This is what creates long-term strength, not bursts of effort, but sustained discipline, not reaction to opportunity, but continuous preparation. And preparation is what most people avoid when results are not visible. They stop refining their skills. They stop improving their process. They wait for something to happen before they act again. But the Stoic does the opposite. He continues, even when nothing is happening, especially when nothing is happening, because he understands that this is where most people fall away. They lose focus, they lose consistency, they lose direction. And this creates space, not externally at first, but internally. You gain an advantage simply by not stopping, by maintaining your standard, regardless of what is happening around you. This is what eventually separates you, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady one. Over time, your actions accumulate, your skills improve, your understanding deepens, and when opportunities do appear, you are ready. Not because you waited for them, but because you prepared for them without needing to see them first. This is where timing begins to make sense. It is not something you control. It is something you meet, and you can only meet it effectively if you are already prepared. This is why acting without expectation is not passive. It is strategic. It allows you to build continuously without interruption. It keeps your momentum intact. It prevents you from becoming dependent on outcomes, and this independence is what makes you consistent. You are no longer adjusting your effort based on what you receive. You are maintaining your effort based on what is required. This is a higher level of discipline, one that does not fluctuate, one that does not weaken under pressure, one that continues regardless. And this consistency begins to change how others see you. Not because you are trying to be noticed, but because your behavior becomes predictable in the best way. You are steady. You are reliable. You do not disappear when things slow down. You do not lose focus when results are delayed. You continue, and this continuation builds something that cannot be forced. Trust, not just from others, but within yourself. You begin to trust that your actions are enough, that your discipline will carry you forward, that your direction is not dependent on immediate confirmation. And once that trust is in place, something else becomes possible. You can finally let go of the need to control the outcome of your efforts. You can act fully without holding on to what comes next. And this is where your work becomes most effective, because it is no longer distorted by expectation. It is no longer influenced by impatience. It is no longer weakened by doubt. It is simply done at the highest level you can maintain, consistently, without interruption. And from that consistency, results begin to emerge, not because you demanded them, but because you created the conditions for them, quietly, without force, without chasing. This is where the shift becomes undeniable. You are no longer working for something. You are working from something, from clarity, from discipline, from self-command, and that changes everything that follows. As your actions become grounded and your discipline no longer depends on outcomes, another realization begins to settle in, one that most people avoid because it strips away illusion. Everything you are holding, everything you are building, everything you are attached to will not remain forever. This is not a thought meant to disturb you. It is a truth meant to steady you. Because much of the tension you carry comes from trying to preserve things as they are. You want stability in a world that does not offer permanence. You want certainty in conditions that are constantly shifting. You want to hold on to moments, people, achievements, as if they can be fixed in place, but they cannot. And every time you try to secure them in that way, you create pressure. You become protective in a way that distorts your behavior. You begin to monitor what you have, not to use it well, but to prevent its loss. You hesitate. You tighten your grip. You move carefully, not with clarity, but with fear of disruption. This is how you lose what you are trying to protect. Not because it was taken, but because your attachment changed how you handled it. The Stoics approached this differently. They did not ignore impermanence. They trained themselves to remember it, not constantly in a dramatic way, but consistently enough to keep their perspective clear. They understood that everything has a limit: time, position, relationships, even the body itself. And instead of resisting that, they accepted it fully. Because once you accept that something will not last forever, you stop trying to control its duration. You begin to focus on how you engage with it while it is here. This removes a great deal of fear. You are no longer trying to prevent loss. You are no longer acting from a place of preservation. You are simply present with what exists without needing to secure it beyond its natural course. This creates a different kind of relationship with everything in your life. You do not take things for granted, but you also do not cling to them. You recognize their value, but you do not depend on their permanence. And this balance is what allows you to experience them fully, without distortion, without tension, without the constant background fear that they might disappear, because you already know they will, and that knowledge frees you. It does not weaken your connection, it clarifies it. A man who understands this does not become distant. He becomes precise. He invests where it matters. He engages fully when something is present, but he does not build his identity around it. He does not lose himself in it. And because of that, when something changes, he does not collapse. He adjusts. He continues. This is what most people struggle with. Not the change itself, but their inability to accept it. They hold on too tightly. They build their sense of stability on things that are inherently unstable. And when those things shift, they lose more than the thing itself. They lose their footing because they tied their identity to it. The Stoic avoids this. He builds his foundation on something that does not depend on external permanence. His character, his discipline, his ability to remain steady regardless of what changes around him. This is what allows him to move through life without fear of loss. Not because he expects nothing to be taken, but because he knows he can continue even when it is. This creates a level of calm that is difficult to disrupt. You are no longer reacting to every change. You are no longer trying to control every outcome. You are simply moving with what is without losing your position. This changes how you handle both success and failure. When something goes well, you do not become overly attached to it. You recognize it, you use it, but you do not depend on it. You do not assume it will last forever, so you remain grounded. When something is lost, you do not interpret it as the end. You see it as part of the process, something that was always going to change. And because you expected that possibility, you are not caught off guard. You are prepared. not in a defensive way, but in a stable one. This preparation is not about predicting exactly what will happen. It is about understanding that change is constant, and that your role is not to prevent it, but to respond to it correctly. This is where your strength becomes consistent, not dependent on circumstances, but rooted in your response. You no longer need things to remain the same in order to feel steady. You carry your steadiness with you. And that steadiness becomes your advantage, because most people are unsettled by change. They react, they hesitate, they lose direction. You do not. You continue, with the same clarity, with the same discipline, with the same control over what is yours. This is what allows you to move forward without interruption, even when things shift, even when something is removed, even when outcomes do not match your expectations, because your expectations are no longer tied to permanence. They are tied to your actions, and your actions remain within your control. This is where the fear of loss dissolves completely. Not because loss is no longer possible, but because it no longer defines your state. You are not built on what you have. You are built on how you operate, and that cannot be taken from you. It can only be abandoned. And once you understand that, you stop clinging. You stop holding on to things beyond their time. You stop trying to preserve what cannot be preserved. You allow things to move, and in doing so, you remain in motion as well, without resistance, without fear, without the need to control what is always changing. This is where a deeper form of freedom begins. Not freedom from loss, but freedom from being controlled by it. And from that freedom, your actions become even clearer, because they are no longer influenced by fear of what might end. They are guided by what is right now, and that clarity prepares you for the next step. Because once you are no longer controlled by fear or attachment, the only thing left is timing. And how you relate to it determines everything that follows. Once you are no longer unsettled by loss, another pressure begins to reveal itself more clearly. It is not fear, not resistance, but impatience. A quiet insistence that things should happen sooner than they are. You begin to notice how often your mind sets invisible deadlines. You expect progress by a certain point, results by a certain time, clarity by a certain stage. And when those expectations are not met, something shifts internally. Not dramatically, but enough to disturb your rhythm. You start to question whether you are moving correctly. You begin to look for signs that something is wrong. You consider adjusting your path, not because it is necessary, but because the timing does not match what you imagined. This is where impatience weakens your position. Not because time matters, but because your relationship with time is distorted. You begin to believe that if something has not happened yet, it may not happen at all. You interpret delay as failure. You treat the absence of visible progress as a sign to reconsider everything. But this assumption ignores something fundamental. Not everything develops at the same pace. Some things require repetition before they show any result. Some things build slowly beneath the surface without any immediate sign of progress. Some things take longer, not because they are failing, but because they are forming correctly. The Stoics understood this through observation, not theory. They saw that nature does not rush. Growth follows a sequence, a structure, a process that cannot be compressed without damaging the result. A seed does not become a tree because it is pushed. It becomes a tree because it is given time, and because the conditions around it allow it to grow at the pace required. This applies to everything you are building. Your skills, your discipline, your position. They do not develop instantly, and trying to accelerate them through impatience does not help. It interferes. You begin to act differently when you are impatient. you check more often, you adjust more frequently, you interrupt your own process in search of confirmation, and this breaks continuity. You are no longer building steadily, you are reacting to time. This is where most people lose momentum. Not because they stop completely, but because they keep changing direction. They do not stay with something long enough to see it develop. They move too soon. They expect visible results too quickly. And when those results do not appear, they assume something is wrong. So they shift. And in shifting, they reset the process again and again. The Stoic avoids this by removing unnecessary expectations about timing. He does not decide when something should happen. He focuses on whether he is doing what is required. This keeps his attention where it belongs, on the process, not on the clock. This does not mean he ignores time. It means he does not let it control his behavior. He understands that delay is not always a problem. Sometimes it is necessary. It allows things to form properly. It allows you to develop the capacity required to handle what you are building. Because receiving something too early can be just as damaging as receiving it too late. If you are not prepared, you will not sustain it, and what is not sustained is lost. This is why patience is not passive. It is disciplined restraint. It is the ability to continue working without needing immediate confirmation. To maintain your standard even when nothing seems to be happening. To trust your actions enough to let them develop without interference. This is difficult at first, because you are used to measuring progress through visible change. You want to see movement. You want to know that what you are doing is working. But over time, you begin to see that not all progress is visible. Some of it is internal. Your thinking becomes sharper. Your actions become more efficient. Your discipline becomes more consistent. These changes are not always obvious, but they are real, and they accumulate. This accumulation is what eventually produces results. Not in a sudden moment, but as a natural outcome of sustained effort. The man who understands this does not rush. He does not try to force things into existence. He builds, quietly, consistently, without interruption. And when results come, they appear almost unexpectedly. Not because they were random, but because he was not watching for them constantly. He was focused on his work. This is what allows him to remain steady. He is not affected by delay. He is not distracted by the absence of visible progress. He continues, and that continuation is what most people fail to maintain. They start strong. They commit fully. But when time passes without clear results, their energy shifts. They begin to doubt. They begin to slow. They begin to look for alternatives. And this breaks their momentum. The Stoic does not break. He remains, not because he is certain of the outcome, but because he is certain of his direction. This certainty is what replaces impatience. He does not need to know exactly when something will happen. He only needs to know that he is doing what is required. And that is enough. Because what is built correctly will eventually show, not according to your timeline, but according to its own. This is where trust becomes essential. Not trust in something external, but trust in the process you are following. Trust that your actions repeated consistently will produce results. Trust that time is not working against you. It is simply part of the structure. And once you understand that, you stop fighting it. You stop trying to speed things up. You stop checking constantly for signs. You allow things to develop. And this creates a different kind of movement, one that is not rushed, one that is not interrupted, one that is steady. And steadiness is what produces lasting results. Not intensity, not urgency, but consistency over time. This is what most people overlook. They focus on effort, but they neglect duration. They want results quickly, but they do not maintain their actions long enough for those results to form. The Stoic reverses this. He focuses on duration. He stays with the process. He allows time to do its part. And because of that, his results are more stable, more reliable, more aligned with what he has built. This is where the final shift begins. You are no longer concerned with when things will happen. You are focused on becoming the person who is ready when they do. And that changes everything, because now your attention is not on waiting. It is on preparation, and preparation is always within your control. When your attention shifts from waiting to preparation, your entire orientation changes. You are no longer looking ahead for signs that something is about to happen. You are looking inward, refining what must be ready before anything can happen at all. This is where most people hesitate, because preparation, when results are not visible, feels uncertain. It lacks the immediate reinforcement that people rely on. There is no applause, no confirmation, no clear indication that what you are doing is leading anywhere. So they slow down, not because they are incapable, but because they do not see a reason to continue at the same level of discipline without visible return. This is where consistency breaks. Not at the beginning, not when motivation is high, but in the middle. In the quiet stretch where nothing seems to change, where effort feels repetitive, where progress is not yet obvious. And this is where most paths end. Not because they were wrong, but because they were abandoned too early. The Stoic understands this stage well. He expects it. He does not interpret it as a problem. He recognizes it as part of the process, because anything that is built with strength requires repetition. Not occasional effort, not bursts of intensity, but sustained, disciplined action over time. This repetition is what shapes you. Not just your results, but your structure. Your ability to think clearly under pressure. Your ability to act without hesitation. Your ability to maintain your standard even when nothing is pushing you to do so. This is what preparation actually is. Not just learning or improving, but stabilizing your behavior. Making your discipline independent of your mood. Making your actions consistent regardless of your environment. This is difficult, because it requires you to continue without reward, to act without recognition, to maintain your effort without knowing exactly when it will produce something visible. But this is what separates those who build from those who wait. The one who waits looks for signs before continuing. The one who builds continues regardless of signs. And over time, this difference becomes significant, because the one who waits interrupts his own progress. He stops and starts. He adjusts constantly. He loses continuity. But the one who builds maintains his pace. He moves forward steadily. He does not reset his process. He allows it to develop. This is where strength compounds, not in moments of intensity, but in the absence of interruption. A man who can maintain his discipline without visible results gains an advantage that is not easily matched. Because most people depend on feedback to continue. They need to see progress. They need to feel that something is happening, and when that feedback is not present, they lose direction. You do not. You remain. And this steadiness is what allows your preparation to reach a different level. You are no longer practicing occasionally. You are refining continuously. Every repetition improves something, even if it is small, even if it is not immediately noticeable. These improvements accumulate. And over time, they create a gap, not visible at first, but real. A difference in skill, a difference in clarity, a difference in how you respond under pressure. And when the moment arrives, that difference becomes visible. Suddenly, what you have been building begins to show. Not because it appeared out of nowhere, but because it was forming all along. You simply did not interrupt it. This is where most people misunderstand success. They see the result, but they do not see the duration behind it. They assume it happened quickly. They assume it was sudden. But what they are seeing is the outcome of sustained preparation, of consistency maintained when nothing was visible, of discipline held without immediate reward. This is what you are building, not just results, but readiness. Because results alone are not enough. You must be able to hold them, to sustain them, to continue building from them. And that requires a different level of preparation. One that is not focused on achieving something once, but on maintaining it over time. This is why repetition matters. It strengthens your foundation. It makes your actions more reliable. It reduces the chance of collapse when pressure increases. A man who has prepared consistently does not need to react when opportunity appears. He is already aligned. He does not need to adjust himself quickly. He does not need to rush. He simply steps into it because he is ready. This readiness is what allows things to move toward you. Not because you attracted them, but because you are no longer out of place when they arrive. You fit the moment, and when you fit the moment, it holds. This is what most people miss. They focus on reaching something, but they do not focus on becoming capable of holding it. And when they reach it too early, they lose it, because they were not prepared. The Stoic avoids this. He does not rush to reach. He builds to sustain. And this makes his progress stable, not temporary, not fragile, but lasting. This is where patience and preparation meet. You are no longer waiting, you are building. And that building continues regardless of what is visible, regardless of how long it takes, regardless of whether anyone notices, because it is no longer dependent on external confirmation. It is part of your structure, part of how you operate. And once it becomes part of you, it no longer requires effort in the same way. It becomes natural. You no longer question whether to continue, you simply do. This is where your path becomes clear. Not because everything is visible, but because your direction is stable. You know what needs to be done. You know how to do it, and you are willing to continue doing it without interruption, without doubt, without the need to see results immediately. This is what allows you to move forward with certainty, even when nothing seems to be happening, even when time passes without visible change. Because you understand something that most people do not. The process is working, even when you cannot see it. And that understanding allows you to continue until the moment arrives. And when it does, you will not need to chase it. You will already be there. At a certain point, something changes in a way that is difficult to explain from the outside, but clear from within. You are no longer trying to get somewhere. You are no longer waiting for something to begin. You are already operating as the person you were trying to become. This shift is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It happens quietly through repetition, through restraint, through the slow removal of everything that once made you reactive. You notice it in how you approach your work. There is no urgency behind it, no tension pushing you forward. You begin, you continue, and you finish without needing to check what it will lead to. The action stands on its own. It does not need justification. You notice it in how you respond to uncertainty. Where there was once hesitation, there is now steadiness. You no longer feel the need to resolve everything immediately. You allow things to unfold while maintaining your direction. You move without forcing. You notice it in how you carry yourself around others. There is less explanation, less effort to be understood, less need to influence how you are perceived. You are not trying to prove anything, you are simply consistent. This is where the need to chase disappears completely. Not because you decided to stop, but because there is nothing left to chase. You are no longer defined by what you lack. You are no longer measuring yourself against what has not yet happened. You are no longer adjusting your behavior to secure outcomes. You are operating from something stable, from clarity, from discipline, from a position that does not shift with every external change. This is what most people never reach. They continue to act, but they never arrive at this internal position. They remain tied to results. They remain influenced by timing. They remain dependent on external movement to confirm their direction. And because of that, they never fully settle into their own path. You have. And that changes how everything unfolds around you. Because when you are no longer reaching outward, your actions become easier to receive. There is no pressure behind them, no hidden expectation, no urgency that others need to respond to. You are simply doing what is required, and this makes your presence different. People do not feel the need to resist you. Opportunities do not feel forced. There is space, and in that space, things can move. This is not something you can imitate. It is the result of removing everything that interferes with natural movement. The need to control, the need to rush, the need to secure outcomes. Once those are gone, what remains is clean, and clean actions produce clean results. Not always immediately, but consistently. This is where your path becomes aligned. Not with what you want in a moment, but with what you have built over time. Everything begins to connect. Your discipline supports your actions. Your actions support your direction. Your direction supports your results. And none of it feels forced. It feels natural, not easy, but clear. You are no longer searching for the next step. You are taking it without hesitation, without doubt, without needing confirmation. This is where self-respect becomes visible, not in what you say, but in how you operate. You do not compromise your standards for short-term gain. You do not lower your discipline when things slow down. You do not adjust your character based on how others respond. You remain, and this consistency creates something powerful, not in a loud way, but in a quiet one. You become someone who can be relied on, not because you promise anything, but because your behavior is stable. You do not shift under pressure. You do not disappear when results are delayed. You continue, and that continuation builds a reputation that does not need to be explained. It is observed. Over time, through your actions. This is where opportunities begin to meet you differently, not because you sought them out aggressively, but because you are now aligned with them. You are ready when they appear. You do not need to adjust quickly. You do not need to prepare at the last moment. You step into them naturally, because you have already done the work. This is what most people misunderstand. They think the moment is what matters, but the moment is only a reflection of what was built before it. If you are not prepared, the moment passes. If you are prepared, it holds. You have reached the point where it holds. Not every time, not perfectly, but consistently enough to see the pattern. Things begin to move toward you, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady one. Conversations open, decisions become easier, paths that once seemed closed begin to shift. And you are not surprised, because you understand that this is not luck, it is alignment, the result of everything you have removed. Everything you have refined, everything you have continued to build without interruption. This is where chasing becomes unnecessary, not because you have everything, but because you no longer depend on anything to begin. You are already in motion, already building, already positioned, and from that position, everything else becomes accessible, not guaranteed, but possible, and possibility is enough, because you now know how to move within it, without losing yourself, without losing your direction, without returning to the patterns that once held you back. This is where the final transition begins, not into something new, but into something fully integrated, where everything you have practiced becomes who you are. And once that happens, there is nothing left to chase, only something to maintain. When everything begins to settle into place, the real test is not whether you can reach this state, but whether you can remain in it. Because it is one thing to understand these principles, to apply them for a period of time to experience the clarity they bring. It is another thing entirely to live from them consistently without slipping back into old patterns. The habits you have built before do not disappear immediately. The urge to check, to anticipate, to control outcomes, to measure your progress against external movement, it does not vanish. It returns quietly, especially when something important is at stake. You will feel it when something matters more than usual, when the outcome seems significant, when the risk appears higher, when the potential gain pulls your attention forward. In those moments, the temptation to reach returns, not physically, but mentally. You begin to lean again. You start thinking ahead, trying to secure the result before it has formed. You feel the impulse to interfere, to add pressure, to make something happen faster than it should. This is where your discipline is tested, not in action, but in restraint. Because at this stage, doing more is not the answer. Holding your position is. A man who has learned to act without attachment must now learn to remain without interference. This requires a different kind of control, not the control of external circumstances, but the control of internal impulse. The ability to notice when your mind begins to reach outward again, and to bring it back without force, without frustration. You do not fight the impulse. You observe it. You recognize it for what it is, a return to old patterns, and then you release it. Not because it is wrong to care, but because it is unnecessary to interfere. This is where your stability becomes reliable, not dependent on conditions, not dependent on how things unfold, but rooted in your ability to remain consistent regardless of what is happening. Most people never reach this level. They improve, but they do not maintain. They experience clarity, but they do not stabilize it. They move forward, but they return to old habits under pressure. This is where the path separates. Because maintenance requires awareness. It requires you to stay attentive to your own behavior, to notice small shifts before they become patterns again, to correct yourself without overreaction, to return to your center repeatedly until it becomes your default. This is not exhausting. It becomes natural over time, but only if you continue to practice it. A man who reaches this stage understands that his work is no longer about building something external. It is about maintaining something internal. His clarity, his discipline, his control over his own responses. Because once these are stable, everything else follows. If they weaken, everything else begins to lose structure. This is why he protects them, not in a defensive way, but in a deliberate one. He chooses what he allows to influence him. He is careful with his attention. He does not expose himself unnecessarily to things that disturb his focus. He maintains his routines. He keeps his actions aligned with his standards, even when there is no immediate reason to do so, especially when there is no immediate reason. Because this is what keeps him steady. This is what prevents regression. This is what allows him to continue without losing what he has built. A simple shift can reveal this clearly. A man who has become stable receives an opportunity. Something he has been working toward begins to appear. At this moment, most people change. They become more reactive. They try to secure it. They adjust their behavior to ensure it does not slip away. And in doing so, they lose the very stability that made the opportunity possible. They return to chasing. The Stoic does not. He remains the same. He handles the opportunity as he handles everything else. With clarity, with discipline, without attachment. He does not rush. He does not try to control what is beyond his influence. He focuses on his actions and allows the rest to unfold. This is what preserves his position, because he does not disrupt it. He does not introduce tension where there was none. He does not interfere with what is already aligned. He maintains, and maintenance is what allows things to develop fully. This is where your control becomes complete. Not over outcomes, not over timing, but over yourself. You no longer react impulsively. You no longer shift under pressure. You no longer abandon your principles when something becomes important. You remain. And that remaining is what most people cannot do. They can act. They can start. They can push forward, but they cannot hold their position when it matters most. You can, because you have trained for it. Through discipline, through restraint, through repeated return to what is within your control. This is where your identity changes. Not in what you say about yourself, but in how you operate. You are no longer someone who is trying to become disciplined. You are disciplined. You are no longer someone who is trying to stay focused. You are focused. You are no longer someone who's trying to remain detached. You are not attached. These are no longer efforts. They are conditions. And once they become conditions, they do not require constant effort to maintain. They require awareness. They require attention. But they do not require struggle. This is where your movement becomes smooth. Not easy, not effortless, but uninterrupted. You continue without internal conflict. You act without hesitation. You remain without interference. And from that place, everything stabilizes, not because the world has changed, but because you have. This is what allows you to live without chasing anything at all, because there is nothing outside of you that you need in order to begin. You are already in position, already moving, already aligned. And that alignment is what allows everything else to follow, without force, without urgency, without the need to reach, only the need to remain. At the end of this path, there is no final moment where everything becomes perfect. There is no clear line where you arrive, and nothing ever challenges you again. What exists instead is something quieter, something far more stable. You no longer need the world to align in order to move forward. You wake up and begin without resistance, not because everything is clear, but because you are. You no longer hesitate at the start of the day, wondering how things will unfold. You step into your actions without needing guarantees, without needing reassurance that it will all work out. This is where your strength becomes visible to yourself, not in what you have achieved, but in how you operate regardless of what you achieve. You notice that your attention no longer drifts the way it used to. It still moves, but you bring it back quickly. You do not allow it to settle in places that weaken you. You do not allow it to attach itself to outcomes that are not yet real. You remain here, and because you remain here, your actions remain clean. You do what is required, and then you release it. You do not carry it forward in your mind. You do not replay it. You do not try to extract certainty from it. You let it stand. This is what creates space. Not empty space, but clear space. A place where your next action can begin without the weight of the previous one. This is how momentum becomes natural. You are not forcing yourself forward. You are not pushing through resistance. You are simply continuing. And continuation, when uninterrupted, becomes powerful. It compounds. It builds quietly. And over time it creates results that do not feel forced. They feel earned. not because they came easily, but because you did not interfere with them. You did not rush them. You did not distort your actions trying to reach them. You allowed your work to develop. And now you can see it, not in a single moment, but across time, in the way things have shifted, in the way your position has changed, in the way your actions now carry more weight. This is where you understand something that once felt unclear. Nothing was ever meant to be chased. What is meant for you is not something you pull toward yourself through force. It's something you meet through readiness. And readiness is built through everything you have practiced, through separating what is yours from what is not, through facing obstacles without resistance, through releasing fear of loss, through remaining present, through refining your desire, through accepting reality, through stabilizing your internal state, through acting without expectation, through understanding impermanence, through respecting time, through preparing without interruption, through becoming. All of this leads here, not to a final result, but to a way of operating, a way of moving through life that does not depend on chasing anything at all, because you are no longer behind. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer trying to force anything into place. You are already aligned, and alignment removes the need for urgency. It removes the need for constant adjustment. It removes the need to prove anything. You do not need to convince the world of your direction. You demonstrate it through consistency, through presence, through the way you handle both progress and delay. This is what others begin to notice, not in a loud way, but in a steady one. They see that you do not react the way most people do. They see that you do not rush when things slow down. They see that you do not collapse when something is lost. And this steadiness creates something that cannot be demanded. It draws attention, not because you seek it, but because it is rare. And from that, things begin to come toward you. Not because you chase them, but because you are now positioned to receive them. You are no longer in the way of your own progress. You are no longer interfering with your own actions. You are no longer creating tension where there should be none. You are simply doing what is required and allowing the rest to unfold. This is what it means to let things come to you. Not to wait passively, not to expect without effort, but to remove everything that was preventing your efforts from working as they should, to stand in your own position, to act with clarity, to remain with discipline, to release what is not yours, and to continue without interruption, without attachment, without the need to chase anything at all. And when you live this way, something becomes clear. You were never lacking opportunity. You were only misaligned with it. Now you are not. And that changes everything, because now your future is not something you are trying to reach. It is something you are already walking into, one step at a time, without force, without noise, without hesitation, just forward, as it should be. These aren't just rules, they're a way of being. You begin to see that nothing outside of you was ever meant to carry your peace. Not outcomes, not timing, not the way others respond. Those things move as they will. What remains is simpler. Your judgment, your actions, your ability to meet what happens without losing yourself in it. When you return to that, something settles. The need to chase fades. The need to control softens. You stop reaching for certainty and start standing in clarity. And from there, life becomes quieter. Not easier, but more direct. You do what is yours to do, and you leave the rest where it belongs. If something here stayed with you, leave a quiet mark below. Perhaps just 2 words. I remain. And if you choose to continue this path, return again, not for answers, but for reminders. Stay with what is yours, and let everything else pass.